Hi everyone, I'm Rob Shapiro from Fitchburg State University, and this is the BACB's 5th edition task list item G5, use modeling and imitation training. So what is modeling? In modeling, learners acquire new skills by imitating demonstrations of those skills performed by a model. The model demonstrates the behavior that is expected to be performed. And models can be live models. We may show someone what we want them to do, or we may have someone else demonstrate it live in the moment. But they can also be video models. And video models can involve just watching a video of someone engaging in the desired response competently. It can also be a point of view video model where we actually are seeing things through the eyes of the person that's performing the task. Which may make it, in some cases, more relevant and meaningful for the potential learner. There's also a practice called video self-modeling, where we actually take video of the learner themselves engaging in the desired response. And this may seem strange at first because, well, if they're able to engage in the desired response, why do we need to use the model, and why do we need to teach them that skill? Well, couple of things. Number one, we may have a case where someone is able to perform the task competently but inconsistently. So if we can get video of them performing the task during one of the times that they're performing it competently and have them use that video to view, that can then occasion more consistent correct responding in the future. Or we can actually, through the use of video editing, we can take the learner engaging in portions of the desired skill correctly and edit it together so it appears like they're engaging in the entire task competently. There are several guidelines for effective modeling. First, the more similar the model is to the learner, the more likely that model is to be effective for the learner. This can have to do with age, gender, race, a wide variety of things, but the more there's similarity between the model and the learner, the more likely it is to be effective, which is, if we think back to that video self-modeling, we can appreciate how that's the ultimate in similarity. So if we're able to do that, that can be really powerful. Also, the prestige of the model can make that model more effective. The more someone has a position of status or is perceived to have a position of status, and this probably makes sense if we think about things that celebrities do and how others may mimic that behavior. Obviously, that's not formal training, but how they may start to wear things similar to what celebrities wear or engage in similar actions on social media. That has to do with the prestige of those celebrities, making it much more likely people are going to imitate their behavior. We also want to think about emphasizing the critical aspect of the behavior. So make sure when we're using modeling, we're really focusing on what's important, on them doing the piece of it that we really want them to do. We can combine modeling with instruction, so it doesn't have to be as simple as just engaging in the task. We can also talk through the task and make sure people know exactly what is expected of them in terms of engaging in the desired behavior. We can have those models be present in a context that's similar to the natural environment. This is going to promote generalization, and it's going to make it seem more relevant for the learner. We can provide opportunities for rehearsal and feedback. So we obviously want the learner to be able to view the model, but then to engage in the behavior in question and get feedback on the quality of their performance. And then finally, we want to provide reinforcement. And this probably makes sense, right? We are always talking about reinforcing behavior. And so we want to reinforce the learner for their efforts in engaging in the modeled behavior, right? So for engaging in their imitation, and the more precise or accurate it is, we might provide more reinforcement or better reinforcement. But we also want to provide reinforcement to the model. And this is interesting. This is not necessarily about really trying to reinforce or increase the model's behavior, but it is about establishing some rule-governed behavior for the learner. It's about the learner being able to see the model getting reinforced, okay, and that raises the incentive for the learner to engage in that response as well. So switching from modeling, which is actually engaging in that response that we want the learner to imitate, what is imitation? And there are 4 criteria for establishing something as an imitative behavior. First, the imitative behavior is occasioned by another person's model of the behavior. So essentially, their response happens as a result of seeing the model engaging in the behavior. Second, the imitative behavior has to share formal similarity with the model. So the modeled behavior and the imitated behavior, they have to look or sound the same. There has to be a shared topography there for it to be imitation. Third, the imitative behavior follows the modeled behavior closely in time. So the model still actually has to be present. The longer the time delay, the more likely that other factors are impacting the occurrence of the behavior. So an example would be is that maybe you see somebody engaging in some kind of a response that you've never engaged in and you've never been reinforced for it, but you see someone engage in some behavior and then gain reinforcement for it, and then later on that same day you engage in that same behavior. That's probably not actually imitation. That's probably more some semblance of rule-governed behavior that's going on in there, because it's just not following closely enough in time. It has to be relatively immediate that the imitative behavior follows the modeled behavior. And then finally, the model has to be the primary controlling variable for the imitated behavior, which basically means that this is a new behavior for the person doing the imitation. It follows a novel antecedent event that the learner has not been exposed to. And so there's no history of reinforcement for that specific topography of behavior. It's a new behavior, novel antecedent, and really the thing that's controlling it is what the model did, okay? And that leads to the imitator engaging in the response. So in terms of doing imitation training, this is a systematic set of steps that teaches a learner to imitate models. And essentially we can think of this as teaching a learner to do what I do. And that language is actually going to be pretty important as we move forward, okay? So it's not about doing any specific thing, but it's about literally teaching a learner to imitate, teaching them to do what the model does, whatever that may be that the model's doing. And ultimately, what we're really looking for with imitation training is not for the learner to be able to imitate one thing. We're looking for generalized imitation, where a learner can imitate a variety of untrained, unprompted, non-reinforced novel behaviors. The learner has basically been reinforced for doing what the model does. And so that forms a stimulus class that, oh, my behavior is doing what the model did, and I get reinforced for doing that. And obviously, this has real value for the learner to be able to see what other people are doing and do the same thing. It's going to set them up for a wide variety of reinforcement and potentially have them avoid punishment, extinction, social stigma for not being able to engage in appropriate or expected behavior based on what other people are doing in a situation. So Cooper has a protocol for imitation training that has several steps. The first step is to assess and teach the prerequisite skills. So in order for imitation training to be effective, the learner has to be able to attend to the model. The learner may also need to be able to do things such as stay seated, look at objects, remain still, but at a very minimum, if the learner doesn't have solid attending skills, they're not going to be attending to the model consistently enough for imitation to be able to take hold. So we may need to, if a learner does not have those prerequisite attending skills, we may need to teach those before moving into formal imitation training. Second, we want to select models for imitation training. And Cooper suggests starting with 25 behaviors that include both gross and fine motor movements across categories that include things like the movements of body parts, such as touching nose, tapping your head, as well as the manipulation of objects. There might be things like playing with a car, on a table, things like that. So we want to select 25 that range across both gross and fine motor and include movement of body parts and the manipulation of objects. And then the third thing is we want to pre-test. We want to ensure attending, say the learner's name, and say, do this, and then perform the action. And then obviously take data. And we're going to use those data to select models for training. So this is the second time that we've seen this language of do this or do what I do. And again, this is really important when we're talking about imitation training. So there's a fundamental difference between saying, do this, okay, and what I'm doing is I'm touching my nose, and saying, touch your nose, and going like this, okay? When I say do this and then I perform the action, I'm doing imitation training. I'm looking for the learner to do what I do, but I haven't told the learner what it is that I'm doing. When I say touch your nose and I go like this, all of a sudden, potentially the learner's action is going to come under the stimulus control of me saying touch your nose, not the action that I'm engaging in. So if we're looking for imitation training, we're not looking to give that specific verbal cue of what we want the learner to do. We're using something more generic like do this or do what I do. So once we've taken our baseline data, we want to sequence the selected models for training. And typically what we're going to do is we're going to arrange these from easiest to most difficult. So we can think about this, that if we had our 25 items, and let's say that we had 5 of them that the learner got right every single time, was able to imitate right out of the chute. We had 5 of them that they got right 2 out of 3 times, 5 that they got right 1 out of 3 times, and 10 that they didn't get right at all. Okay, if we're sequencing those from easiest to most difficult, we're going to take the 5 that they got right every single time, and we're going to consider those mastered already. We don't even consider those. Okay, so what we do is we start with the ones that the learner got most but not all. So the ones they got right 2 out of 3 times. Right, we might start there, and those would be the first 5 that we would work on. The next 5 would be the ones that they got right 1 out of 3 times, and then the last 10 would be the ones that they didn't get right at all during our baseline data. Okay, so we sequence our selected models from easiest to most difficult, and then we actually conduct our imitation training sessions. And what this looks like for every session is doing a pre-assessment where we take 3 of our learning targets, and we present each one of them 3 times, okay? We present them with the do this, and we remove any that are correct all 3 times, because we're going to be considering those likely mastered, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to take one of those targets that didn't get removed, and we're going to repeatedly present that target. And this may include prompting. So it may include, do this, and we touch our nose if that's one of them, and then we may have to take the learner's hand and guide it to their nose. And that's okay, we can do that, but we do that repeated presentation of one of the targets, and then once we've done that repeatedly, a number of trials, we then would do our post-assessment, which is, Cooper recommends a 5 by 5 by 3, which we would take 5 imitation targets that we have determined are mastered, and 5 that we have determined are emerging, so ones that they're getting right sometimes but not all, and present each of those 5 3 times each to see how our learners are doing. And then Cooper also suggests probing for imitation with novel models. So taking 5 models that have not been trained at all, that potentially the learner has not been exposed to at all, and probing those. And specifically what we're doing there is we're probing for generalized imitation. Because again, ultimately the goal is to get our learner to a point where they're not just imitating things that we've trained them to imitate, that they're able to, whenever it's, someone does something, they're able to imitate that, even if it's something they've never seen before. Okay, that's really the goal with generalized imitation. And then some guidelines for imitation training. Number 1, keep the sessions active and brief, 10 to 15 minutes. And again, this is going to hold true for lots of training. that we're doing. It's not specific to imitation training, but we want to keep active learner responding, really high interest, high pace, not a lot of downtime, but relatively brief, because that can be tiring, and so we want to be sensitive to the stamina of our learners. We want to reinforce both prompted and imitative responses, especially initially. So ideally, what we want is imitation that's occurring without prompts, but especially at the beginning, even if we have to prompt those responses, we want to reinforce that too, and then gradually fade our prompts. We want to pair verbal praise and attention with tangible reinforcers. Just lots of ways for the individual to be reinforced, ultimately with the goal that verbal praise and attention, which are much more likely to be present in the natural environment, we want that verbal praise and attention to be what maintains behavior as opposed to tangible reinforcers over the course of time. If progress stalls, which it may, we want to be patient, we want to back up and move ahead slowly if we have to. Over the course of time, we want to fade out our prompts, and then ultimately we want to make data-based decisions, which is why we're doing those that probe data, that baseline data, that post-training data, to be able to establish, okay, when have we got generalized imitation? How is our learner doing with different targets? Where do we have to move our targets? And again, this is not specific to imitation training. This is at the heart of ABA. But ultimately, we want the decisions that we make, to be based on data. All right, and that sums up modeling and imitation.